This example is going to show how to factor a quadratic using the cloud method. Now I have a quadratic, 4x squared minus 5x minus 6. First step in factoring any quadratic is to look at each of the terms in the quadratic, 4x squared minus 5x minus 6, and try to identify if there's a greatest common factor that can be factored out of any of them. 4x squared minus 5x minus 6 has nothing that I can divide out of all three, therefore there's no GCF. I can get right into factoring this. The cloud method says I take this first number, 4, and I multiply it by this last number, negative 6. So 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. So I'm going to write that as my constant, negative 24. The middle term is going to stay the same, negative 5x, but now instead of writing 4x squared, I'm just going to write x squared. So in essence, I'm just dropping that first coefficient on the x squared and making my constant out the back larger. And this, I say, you know what, I'm going to keep this 4 kicking around in a cloud because I have to use it again. So now I just look at this simplified quadratic that has no leading coefficient. And to factor this, I need to consider two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to that middle term of negative 5. So to find those two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and add to a negative 5, I consider all of the factors of 24. The factors of 24 are 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. Those are the only numbers that can multiply to a 24. And now if I examine each individual pair, I try to say which pair somehow has a relationship to the number 5. Well, 3 and 8 do, because 8 minus 3 gives me a 5. So now I have to think about 3 and 8, and I have to consider if I multiply 3 times 8, I get a 24. If I add 3 and 8 right now, I get an 11. So I have to have one of these numbers, 8 or 3, be a negative for this to work. So I can consider negative 3 times 8. That gets me negative 24. That's good. But if I add those two numbers, I get a positive 5, and I need a negative 5. So that means I have to switch my positive and negative around, and my two numbers would be a positive 3 and a negative 8. That still multiplies to negative 24, but now 3 and negative 8 add to negative 5. So my two numbers, 3 and negative 8, to start factoring, I go back here and I say x, and my two numbers are positive 3, negative 8. Those two things, this and this added together get me negative 5, multiplied together gets me negative 24. Now this is where this 4 comes back out of the cloud. The 4 gets divided by those constants. Now what I should try to do is look at any fraction that's created, like 3/4, and say, can I put that in lowest terms? If I can, go ahead and do it. If you can't, that 4 simply now becomes the coefficient in front of the x. So I get 4x plus a 3, because the 3 was already there. Now if I look at this, negative 8 minus 4, that's just negative 2. So this one just becomes x minus 2. So basically now I've factored my original quadratic. I have 4x plus 3 multiplied by x minus 2 would multiply back into 4x squared minus 5x minus 6. Factored the quadratic using the cloud method.